Senior Day is quickly approaching over at Texas, and the question of to stay or not to stay is certainly something that might need to be answered when it comes to Quinn Ewers. Ewers not expected to take part in Senior Day this coming Saturday when the third-ranked Longhorns host Kentucky, but the future of Ewers in that orange for Texas certainly a little bit more murky. Maybe could be the final game played at home at Texas Memorial Stadium in Austin for Ewers. That remains to be seen, but the numbers for Ewers as he's been the quarterback of Texas in his career have been very good, despite the fact that fans seem like maybe they love Ewers, maybe they don't. But since he was named the starting QB, he led them to their first CFP appearance and is fifth on the Longhorns career passing list with the potential to move up before this season is over. Let's bring in Chris Hummer now to join in on this conversation. And Chris, you have an article up on CBSSports.com right now chronicling kind of just this mercurial path that could happen with Quinn Ewers and the future with him as the Texas QB. What do you think happens as we look forward to this Saturday? We know he's not going to take part in the Senior Day, but he has a year of eligibility left. How is this situation really viewed?
Well, I mean, I think it's one of the quietly biggest questions in college football over the next month. I hope Quinn Ewers would get a loud cheer from Texas fans on Saturday. It's been a bit of an uneven season for Quinn in terms of people's perception about his performance on the field. Largely, I think, because of the backup quarterback behind him. But at the end of the day, Texas is 9-1 and has a chance to compete for a national championship potentially over the next couple weeks. So it's an important moment for Quinn on Saturday, but looking forward, I definitely think there are some questions about his future. I've talked to some scouts who don't necessarily believe he's a lock to be a first-round pick, which I think is what everybody anticipated for him coming into the year. And if he's not a first-round pick, I don't know if he'd go out to the league. That is obviously a family decision, but I do know that last year the Ewers family decided for him to come back to school, get more experience in the field, get more starts, largely with the goal of him emerging as a first-round pick and a long-term NFL passer. And if that grade isn't where they want it to be in a month or two, and they're making that decision, who knows what he ends up doing, which I think makes this very interesting given the man behind him.
Yeah, you mentioned that man behind him. Of course, that is Arch Manning. And this week leading up to Saturday's game, when Steve Sarkisian and when Quinn Ewers were asked, hey, is this going to be Ewers' final home game? Both kind of just said, I don't know. How big do you think the elephant in the room is the lurking future of Arch Manning? Will that maybe sway whether Ewers goes to the NFL or leaves or decides to come back?
Well, I don't think Arch Manning would have anything to do with Quinn's decision to go to the league or not go to the league. I think his family is a very detail-oriented group, and the people who represent him are very detail-oriented in the way they're going to approach this. And I don't think his backup quarterback's going to impact that. Could it have an impact on if he comes back to Texas? If he comes back for another year, that's a different question. But it obviously has an impact. He's in a Dr. Pepper commercial nationally every single Saturday where he jokes about not needing to call for backup. This is obviously a thing. It's been a thing all season in Austin. It's been a thing all season nationally. Every headline, it feels like, has Arch Manning included. So it's obviously a big deal. I mean, Quinn Ewers was the #1 overall quarterback in his class. Arch Manning was the #1 overall quarterback in his class. And you just don't tend to see #1 overall players in their class sit for 3 seasons, which is the scenario we're talking about if Quinn Ewers comes back to Texas for another year. So I think at a certain point, just rationally, things would come to a head in that scenario.
So then let's say a scenario presents itself, maybe kind of like what happened with Dylan Gabriel and him leaving Oklahoma to go to Oregon, where maybe he's kind of forced out as Ewers, and in no uncertain terms they say, okay, maybe you're not going to go to the league, but you should hit that portal because we want to give the rock to Manning.
Well, yeah, I mean, first, I think that would be a really sad occurrence if you're a Texas fan or just a Longhorn in general. I mean, Quinn Ewers is going to go down as one of the 3 or 4 best passers in program history. The stats bear that out. He's the guy who helped lift Texas back up to national relevance over the last couple of years. But yeah, I mean, it is certainly a realistic scenario. Industry sources for a couple of weeks now behind the scenes, to me, have speculated about what if Quinn Ewers leaves. This is not like a quiet conversation behind the scenes. It's happening. I think there are people around the Texas program who believe he'll go to the league eventually. But there's certainly some chatter around the country that Quinn could go in. And yeah, if he went in, he'd be the most popular quarterback in the market. Like, there's no question about that. I think there's probably 130 teams that would take him in a heartbeat. So it would definitely be very similar to that Dillon Gabriel situation. Although I think Dillon Gabriel, for however you want to take it, was a little bit more of a rental for Oklahoma football coming in as late as he did in his career, whereas Quinn has been the guy for Texas the last 3 seasons.
You got to think that if Quinn Ewers did enter the transfer portal, that NIL money that he's already bringing in right now would probably skyrocket even more. So from like a monetary standpoint, he would get paid if he does come back to college, right?
Yeah, I don't think he'd get paid like quite like late first round money or like second round pick money, but Quinn is a multimillionaire because of college football. Like, there's no question about that. We all know the Quinn Ewers headline. He was the guy who left high school early to go to Ohio State because of a 7-figure NIL deal. If he were to go in the portal as a quarterback, like, high-end quarterbacks in the market tend to make in the low ones, like mid-ones range, and that was last year. We're running a rev share era where like their schools are going to have like anywhere from like $14 to $18 million to spend on their roster. A high level quarterback is going to account for a significant portion of that cap, just like we see in the NFL. So yeah, there's plenty of money to be made if any high level quarterback goes in the portal, and that includes Quinn Ewers.
Yeah, truly, this is an interesting conversation that we're having about a QB who has been so good for Texas, but despite that, the future of him with the Longhorns is so uncertain. Chris Hummer, thank you so much. Make sure y'all go check out his article on CBSSports.com because it is certainly worth the read. And there's always things to read over at 24/7 Sports, whether you're checking them out on YouTube or online for that coverage from the college level when we're talking recruiting, when we're talking transfer portal, like we just mentioned, how much money is someone bringing in and what could they maybe garner if they do decide to dip their toes into the water. So pick your school, get that coverage. 24/7 Sports will always have you covered. And we want to keep that Quinn Ewers conversation going, and for that we bring in our NFL draft expert, Ryan Wilson. Ryan, when you see Quinn Ewers right now, because I remember like early in the season, back when my Panthers were doing awful, there were some mock drafts that were having the Panthers taking Quinn Ewers out there. But how do you feel about him as we stand here today?
Hey, Zach, good to see you. And you talk about early in the season, and that Michigan game sticks out to me. They went into Ann Arbor, and Quinn Ewers was a big reason for their success there. He is very good at relying on his playmakers around him. Gunnar Helms having a great season. Isaiah Bond, the wide receiver, as well. But then he had the injury a few weeks later, missed some time. We heard Chris talk about the transition to Arch Manning and how fans feel about that. And since his return, they played Georgia and Oklahoma. He looked rusty, and understandably so. But the last 3 weeks against Vandy, against your Florida Gators, where he threw 5 touchdowns and no interceptions, in the last week against Arkansas, he started to look a little bit more like the Quinn Ewers we were hoping to see. But their overarching issue is this. It's the lack of consistency, and not just from Quinn Ewers, but when you look around at the other quarterbacks in this draft class, Zach, Carson Beck is in that conversation. Quinn Ewers has battled injuries, and then the inconsistency with making decisions that you don't want to see a first-round pick make. And Chris touched on this, that when you talk to people around the league, he's not a first-round pick right now. That doesn't mean he won't be a day 2 pick, because that feels like where he's going to land as we sit here, and there's still a month or so to go in the season and the entirety of the pre-draft process. But this isn't like last year where we saw Jaden Daniels emerge out of a day 3 pick situation to become the number 2 overall pick. We haven't seen that person yet in this class, whether it's Quinn Ewers or Carson Beck or even Garrett Nussmeier. And there could be a situation where, unlike last year where 6 quarterbacks went in the top 12 picks, we could see a handful of guys, Quinn Ewers included, decide to return to school and perhaps up their draft stock looking ahead to 12 months from now.
Yeah, so maybe a weaker draft class at the QB position than we thought that we potentially would have when the season began. And take a look at this list that we have here. According to CBS Sports, the top prospects when it comes to QBs for this upcoming season in the NFL. And you see Quinn Ewers there at 3. How do you feel about this whole class here? And does Quinn maybe have the ability, do you think he could rise up above Shedeur or Cam if he plays well in these last few games of the year?
He would have to really ball out to change opinions in that regard. I think Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders are going to be battling for QB1. But again, Zach, when you talk about this class compared to last year's class, Cam Ward and Shedeur, Cam's slightly #1 for me ahead of Shedeur. They're probably QB5 or QB6 in last year's class. So I think as that list is we saw there, that graphic, that's the aggregate rankings among all the CBS Sports draft dudes. I have Quinn Ewers QB4 right now, and it's almost by default. Jalen Milroe's a hair above him, but who's Jalen Milroe in terms of a passer? So, again, there's so many questions. But to your point, there's about a month left in the season. If Texas gets into the playoffs, what can they do there? And that's where opinions start to change. And look at last year with Michael Penix Jr. Once they got into the playoffs. There was some conversation about whether he would be a first-round pick or not. Ended up being the 8th overall pick at quarterback. And if Quinn Ewers can maintain what he's done in terms of coming back from injury and then take it to another level, same holds for Carson Beck, maybe there's an opportunity for them to sneak into the bottom of the first round. Because what's going to happen is Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders are probably going to be top 10 picks, maybe even top 5 picks. And then the question becomes, and there are a ton of QB-needy teams, which one of these quarterback-needy teams that doesn't find a quarterback in free agency decides to trade up into the first round and perhaps take a flyer on a Carson Beck or a Quinn Ewers or a Jalen Milroe? Because that's going to be the conversation that we're going to have over the next 150 days or so until we get to the actual draft.
So in that time leading up to the draft, let's say if the scouts start to give Quinn Ewers a second-round grade, do you think then, with that in mind, Ewers would go back to college, whether that be to transfer or to return to Texas, saying he doesn't want to be in the second round?
That's going to be the question, right? And Chris talked a little bit about that a moment ago. But Garrett Nussmeier should return to school out of LSU. He's had a strong season, but certainly some inconsistencies there. If Carson Beck can come back, I would certainly think about it. I would love for Jalen Milroe to come back. I don't know if he will. Miller Moss, who started the season at USC and has since been benched, he's probably going to enter the transfer portal. But he has a chance to be a day 2 guy if he can put it all together. So there'll be competition next year, Zach, is what I'm saying. But there's no reason that Quinn Ewers can't be QB1 next year if he decides to return to school. And by the way, there are worse things than being a second-round pick. Sometimes you land in a better situation. You're not going, not to bring this back up, but you're not Bryce Young going to your Carolina Panthers, for example. Perhaps there's a situation where you land with the Rams. You land with the 49ers. And speaking of the 49ers, I see a little bit of Brock Purdy in Quinn Ewers' game. Brock Purdy, last person drafted in his draft class, Mr. Irrelevant, and he's on his way to making $50+ million a year when he gets that new deal coming his way.
Yeah, a lot of questions that still need answers. My questions about the Panthers, they will get answered because I'm telling you still Bryce Young's going to figure it out, and hopefully Quinn Ewers will figure it out over time as well. Right on, Ryan Wilson. I appreciate you for your time. Always a pleasure. And this Saturday, we have some great games coming up for you on CBS Sports Network. The slate starts at 12 Eastern with Sam Houston and Jacksonville State. But look at that game there at 7 o'clock Eastern. Number 12 ranked Boise State with Ashton Genty traveling out to Laramie, Wyoming to take on Wyoming. And on the sideline for that game will be our very own Brandon Baylor. So make sure you tap in to that game on CBS Sports Network on Saturday.